Good afternoon, friends. There was an explosion at a chemical plant in the United States. The event unfolded in the city of Shepherd in Texas. Immediately after the incident, a large-scale fire broke out. Video footage taken by witnesses shows a column of toxic black smoke rising into the sky. Plant personnel were successfully evacuated in the first minutes, but were not without casualties. One of the 40 employees suffered injuries and burns. A particularly worrying fact is that together with the combustion products, toxic chemicals were released into the atmosphere. This plant produces solvents for removing adhesives and paint. These chemicals are toxic and carcinogenic, which can cause damage and irritation to eyes and skin. San Jacinto County authorities urged residents living within a 1.5-mile radius to stay indoors, do not use air conditioners and turn off heating systems. Rescuers also had to evacuate a private school and temporarily shut down the highway. By morning, the fire had been contained and the shedding process is underway. Environmental watchdogs are monitoring air quality and no chemicals have been detected so far. The causes of the emergency are still unclear and an investigation will begin once the fire is fully extinguished. This footage was also captured in the U.S. A giant water tornado was captured on video by eyewitnesses in Oregon. The funnel moved along the southern coast, approaching the land especially in the vicinity of the Gold Beach area. The footage shows the size of the tornado and it is difficult to foresee what consequences could have occurred if it had reached the coast. Fortunately, however, the incident was bypassed. After a commotion off the coast, the water vortex dissipated and thankfully there were no casualties or destruction. Waking up in the morning, the residents of New Orleans saw an unusual sight. The area was enveloped in a super fog. Visibility did not exceed a few meters. The scenario resembled that of a horror movie, where a monster could appear out of the fog at any moment. Motorists were particularly hard hit, and at least 2 serious accidents had already occurred. To ensure the safety of drivers, emergency services were forced to temporarily close several highways. Specialists explained that the super fog was formed as a result of a mixture of normal fog and smoke from forest fires continuing in the region. Similar conditions are expected to persist through the end of the week. Residents are asked to exercise caution, refrain from driving and postpone long-distance travel. This has already happened in the Nizhny Novgorod region. Here, a passenger train collided with a truck on the way from Zavolzy to Nizhny Novgorod. It is reported that the truck driver entered the railroad tracks incorrectly, despite the emergency braking applied by the driver. Unfortunately, the distances proved to be insufficient. The collision caused the first carriage of the train to derail and a fire ensued. Hours later, emergency services managed to completely extinguish the flames. It is sadly known that the driver of the truck died at the scene. The passengers of the train, fortunately, were not injured, and they were evacuated by bus, which took them to another station. At present, all the circumstances of the emergency are being clarified. Suburban trains in the direction of Nizhny Novgorod will depart from Pravdinsk station until the restoration work is completed. The Dominican Republic is currently facing problems due to heavy rains that caused flooding. In the city of Bonao, the Fula River has overflowed its banks, flooding almost the entire area. According to the latest reports, 3 people have died and 2 are missing. Forces are deployed to search for the missing, especially important as 2 children are reportedly among them. The streets are in chaos, traffic is almost impossible and there is no power supply in some areas. Authorities are urging locals to stay in their homes. be vigilant and monitor messages from rescue workers. There is a possibility that evacuation of the population will have to be carried out, as reported by local media. The situation remains tense, and further steps will depend on the dynamics of weather conditions and the actions of emergency services. The situation is similar in Kenya and Somalia, where floods have also occurred after heavy rains. According to the latest information, 40 people became victims of the disaster. Tens of thousands of residents were forced to leave their homes, moving to safe areas. Structures have been destroyed, bridges have been swept away by water flows, and roads have been flooded, making it difficult for emergency services to operate. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has warned of a high risk of flooding along the Juba and Shabelle rivers, calling for the evacuation of people from the areas. Forecasters' predictions point to a possible worsening of flooding in the coming days. People are being asked to gather basic necessities and follow the instructions of emergency services. The floods come amid a severe drought that has already brought Kenya and Somalia to the brink of famine. This year's heavy rains in those countries have been much more intense than usual, which experts say is linked to climate change and the El Niño phenomenon. Hundreds of cars that were either shelled or firebombed in an attack by Hamas radicals are being transported to junkyards in Israel. Authorities are moving the vehicles from areas affected by the militant attack and temporarily stockpiling them for disposal. According to Israeli politicians, all of these vehicles were either victimized by armed militants or were subjected to fire attacks. These events occurred at the very beginning of the Palestinian-Israeli standoff, when more than 1,400 people were killed on the Israeli side and at least 200 more were kidnapped. Tel Aviv then launched a massive operation to destroy Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The enclave is still under intense bombardment, which has killed more than 10,000 civilians, including children and women. UN experts warn Israel against using a policy of collective punishment against the people of Gaza. Politicians warn that a humanitarian crisis will arise in the region, bringing suffering to the population and causing a veritable inferno. This is the story of Anna Rodnasheva, who completed a bicycle ride from Vladivostok to Sochi, covering a distance of 11,000 kilometers. The story sounds like something unbelievable, but for Anna it was a realized example of how you can turn traveling into a real pleasure. It all started with a cycling tour last year from Moscow to Sochi. After covering 3,000 kilometers, Anna decided she wanted more and embarked on a longer adventure. On May 10, 2023, she started her journey from Tokarevsky Lighthouse in Vladivostok. The most difficult was the first month of the journey, when she had to travel 100 kilometers every day, despite fatigue and muscle pain. Anna admits that the biggest challenge for her was worrying about encountering predators. She constantly looked around for danger and sped up pedal revolutions at suspicious sounds. After a while, the girl got used to the road and successfully avoided encounters with predators. But on her way she saw deer, foxes, and even camels. Friends, which of the current events in the world, be it climate change or geopolitical difficulties, are of particular concern to you? How do you feel about the explosion and fire at a chemical plant in the United States? Is it possible, in your opinion, to determine the cause of this incident? And do you feel sympathy for ordinary Americans who were affected by the fire, especially in the context of their health? What do you think is behind the increase in regional conflicts in the world, and who or what is playing a catalyzing role in these processes? How do you feel about the story of the Muscovite woman who bicycled from Vladivostok to Sochi? Would you be interested in repeating such an adventure, And what are the longest trips you've taken in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. I wish you peace and goodness. Take care of yourselves and our common home, our planet, always remaining people with a capital letter.